My name is Julia Stojanovic. Today we will discuss bias in artificial intelligence. To make our discussion concrete, let's talk about hiring. Since the 1990s, and increasingly so in the last decade, commercial tools are being used by companies large and small to hire more efficiently, source and screen candidates faster and with less paperwork, and select candidates who will likely do well on the job. These tools are also meant to improve efficiency for the job applicants, allowing them to apply with a click of a button, matching them with relevant positions, and facilitating the interview process. In their 2018 report called Help Wanted, Miranda Bogan and Aaron Rike described the hiring process as a funnel. It starts when employers source candidates, for example by ads or job postings. Next, during the screening stage, employers assess candidates by analyzing their experience, skills, and characteristics. Through interviewing applicants, employers continue their assessment in a more direct fashion. During the selection step, employers make final hiring and compensation determinations. This last stage usually includes background checks and determining an appropriate level of compensation. Importantly, data and predictive analytics, that we have been casually denoting AI, are used during all of these stages. As stated by Jenny Yang, former commissioner of the US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, automated hiring systems act as modern gatekeepers to economic opportunity. Unfortunately, we're seeing time and again that things can go very wrong when we start using automated hiring systems without a strong and proactive focus on a balance between the benefits and the risks. One of the earliest indications that there's cause for concern came in 2015 with the results of the Ad Fisher study out of Carnegie Mellon University that was broadly circulated by the press. Researchers ran an experiment in which they created two sets of synthetic profiles of web users, who were the same in every respect in terms of their demographics, stated interests, and browsing patterns, with a single exception: their stated gender, male or female. In one experiment, the Ad Fisher tool simulated an interest in jobs in both groups. Researchers showed that Google displayed ads for a career coaching service for high-paying executive positions far more frequently to the male group than to the female group. This brings back memories of the time when it was legal to advertise jobs by gender in newspapers. This practice was outlawed in the United States in 1964, but it persists in the online ad environment today. Let us move forward in time and also advance to the next stage of the hiring funnel, resume screening. In 2018, it was reported that Amazon's AI recruiting tool that was developed with the stated goal of increasing workforce diversity, in fact, did the opposite thing. The system taught itself that male candidates were preferable to female candidates. It penalized resumes that included the word women's, as in women's chess club captain. And it downgraded graduates of two all-women's colleges. The results aligned with and reinforced a stark gender imbalance in the workforce. I'm showing here on the right global workforce and tech workforce breakdowns for the platforms, with men in blue and women in red. Other examples of discrimination include shutting out people suffering from mental illness, such as depression or bipolar disorder, on the basis of online personality tests, even if they have the right skills for the job. Another example, later yet in the hiring funnel, during a post-interview background check by a potential employer, was surfaced by LaTanya Sweeney, a computer science professor on the faculty at Harvard, who showed that Googling for African-American sounding names is more likely to trigger ads suggestive of a criminal record than with white-sounding names, even controlling for whether an individual in fact has a criminal record. And if you wanted to know whether Google knows which names are racially identifying, go to Google Images now and enter LaTanya and then enter Kristen. The person I'm highlighting is Latanya Sweeney. The cases I presented have one thing in common. They show that AI can reinforce and exacerbate unlawful discrimination against minority and historically disadvantaged groups. Often, this is called out as bias in AI. So why are sophisticated systems that aim to make hiring more efficient and, importantly, more equitable are failing at this and arguably making things worse? Of course, the issues of bias in employment are not new. They exhibited themselves in the analog era as well. For example, in their well-known 2004 study, Marianne Bertrand and Sendil Mulainathan sent fictitious resumes to help-wanted ads in Boston and Chicago newspapers. To manipulate perceived race, they randomly assigned African American or white-sounding names to resumes. White names received 50% more callbacks for interviews. This case shows that bias is due to human decisions. And what happens with AI is that this bias is picked up, amplified, and fed back into the system. That is, unless we decide to intervene. In their seminal 1996 paper, Batya Friedman and Helen Nissenbaum identified 3 types of bias that can arise in computer systems, presented here as a 3-headed dragon: pre-existing, technical, and emergent. Pre-existing bias exists independently of an algorithm itself and has its origins in society. Technical bias is introduced by the system because of the way it's designed or operates. Recall the Ad Fisher study that demonstrated that ads for high-paying jobs are presented more frequently to men than to women. It was later shown that part of the reason this was happening is the mechanics of the advertisement targeting system itself, as an artifact of the bidding process. Finally, emergent bias arises over time, because the decisions made with the help of the system change the world, which in turn impacts the operation of the system going forward. A hiring manager to whom an AI tool repeatedly suggests the same kind of job applicant as a good fit will, over time, come to believe that this is what a promising employee looks like. Let us now spend a couple of minutes on pre-existing bias, namely on bias that exhibits itself in the data. Data is an image of the world, its mirror reflection. When we think about bias in the data, we interrogate this reflection. One interpretation of bias in the data is that the reflection is distorted. We may systematically overrepresent or underrepresent particular parts of the world in the data, or otherwise distort the readings. Recall the failure of Amazon's recruiting AI to improve workforce diversity. This tool was trained using historical data, resumes of people who were hired in the past. That training was subject to pre-existing bias. In that data, there was an underrepresentation of women in the workforce, and in particular in technical roles. A more subtle point is about distortions. When we consider features like an individual's score on a standardized test, do we take these at face value? Or do we account for differences in access to educational opportunity, like going to a better school or having access to paid tutoring? Another interpretation of bias in the data is that even if we were able to reflect the world perfectly in the data, it would still be a reflection of the world such as it is today, and not necessarily of how it could or should be. I'd like to make a couple of points based on the mirror metaphor. The first is that it's important to keep in mind that a reflection cannot know whether it's distorted. Data alone cannot tell us whether it's a distorted reflection of a perfect world, a perfect reflection of a distorted world, or if these distortions compound. The second point is that it's not up to data or algorithms, but rather up to people, individuals, groups, and society at large to come to consensus about whether the world is how it should be, or if it needs to be improved, and if so, how we should go about improving it. My final point is that changing the reflection may not change the world. If the reflection itself is used to make important decisions, for example, whom to hire or what salary to offer to an individual being hired, then compensating for the distortions is worthwhile. But the mirror metaphor only takes us so far. We have to work much harder, usually going far beyond technological solutions, to make lasting change in the world, not merely brush up the reflection. Thank you very much.